Dr. Moore Abolo.
Just a minute, yeah. Well, thank you very much. It's still morning over here in Canada, and I'm happy to receive this invitation from Morgan's. I would say that I'm so happy to be here. I have listened to some of the presentations, and I can say for sure that this is a very, very robust conversation that is going on. So I'm going to talk about conduct risk, and from the Nigerian and African perspective. And so the first parts of the slides will deal with trying to lay the foundation for the discussion. So can we go to the next slide? The next slide, yeah. Now, so what exactly is conduct risk? Although it's been mentioned, so I'm not going to spend too much time on this. But essentially, when we talk about conduct risk, we are talking about behavior. Essentially about behavior or misbehavior, as it were. It's about, so any action, according to Philip Cooper, when he was making his presentation at the BBA Conduct Risk Seminar in 2012, he said that any action of an individual bank, I think we can just put organization there, any action of an organization that leads to customer detriment or negatively impacts market stability. We can also take that of the FCA, the Financial Conduct Authority, which says that conduct risk is the risk that firm behavior will result in poor outcomes for customers. So the bottom line is every action or inaction, every misbehavior or behavior on the part of any organization that have any impact on stakeholders generally, not just customers. Although the discussion about conduct risk, was narrowed down initially to relate to customers, but that has been expanded to relate essentially to all stakeholders. So whether employees of an organization, then the market as a whole, in which case we talk about market conduct. So this is a very, very important issue, and so it's been elevated to the point that we have organizations and banks, and having certain individuals, focusing on managing, conduct risk. So let's go to the next slide. So essentially, these are the key drivers of conduct risk in every organization. And so it's important to pay very close attention to these drivers. And the reason why we are talking about drivers is because that if you want to manage any risk for that matter, whether it's conduct risk or any risk for that matter, you need to be able to look at, take a look at the drivers of that risk. It is this understanding of the drivers of this risk that we can conduct a proper, risk assessment. So when it comes to conduct risk, and when you want to manage this conduct risk in our respective organizations, we need to ensure that all of these drivers are woven into the risk management process and architecture. So essentially, the way our actions, which are based on enhanced scorecards. Some companies focus on scorecards that focus only or mostly on profitability and all of that. But the issue of conduct risk goes beyond that. We need to take all of the factors into account and build all of these drivers into our risk management programs. Once we do that, then we'll be able to be in a position to manage conduct risk in our respective organizations. Some of the banks where I worked on before, you find that they designate someone like the chief compliance officer, also taking a very hard look at conduct. So you have a chief compliance officer also doubling as the chief conduct officer. What that simply means is that it is now a very serious issue. It can no longer be hidden somewhere. It's something that must be on the table for every organization, and that's why you find in UK, for instance, you have regulation for that. That's what they call the financial conduct authority. It used to be FSC. That means that any misbehavior on the part of financial institutions or any organization for that matter has a way of impacting on the entire market, and therefore every organization must pay very, very close attention to the issue of conduct risk. And paying attention means that we must factor all of these drivers into the equation. The next slide, please. So here are some key questions for every organization as we try to navigate and try to manage conduct risk. But first of all, let me mention that managing conduct risk must not be handled in isolation. In risk management, we talk about correlations. We cannot isolate, and therefore it must be within the enterprise risk management architecture. So as we are conducting risk assessment for every aspect of risk in the organization, conduct risk must be factored into that equation and therefore must be managed holistically if we are to deliver optimal result. But here are some key questions that every organization must pay attention to when it comes to the issue of conduct risk. The first one is that what proactive steps do you take as a firm to identify the conduct risk inherent within your business? So we're talking about proactive steps. And in terms of risk identification, in trying to identify conduct risk, it must be within the context of the definition of risk under ISO 31000 ERM. Specifically, ISO 31000 says that risk is the effect of uncertainty on objectives. Therefore, managing conduct risk means in trying to identify risk, it must be within the context of the objectives of the organization. And that objective cannot go outside what is determined within the space of the market. The second question is, what support, broadly defined, does the firm put in place to enable those who are managing this risk to be able to deliver results? And how do you encourage the individuals who work across the spectrum of the organization, the first line, the second line, and the third line of defense? What kind of encouragement, what kind of resources are you deploying to manage conduct risk? And how does the board and the executive management, how do they provide oversight of the conduct of the business within their organization? So the issue of board responsibility, oversight responsibility is very key here. The kind of body language which the board is projecting to the rest of the organization, which we also refer to as the tone at the top, is very key when we are talking about conduct risk. The signal has to come from the board. So talking about behavior, talking about conduct, it must come from the board level in terms of oversight responsibility and percolate to the entire spectrum of the organization, from the front line to the first line, the second line, and the third line of defense. And has the firm assessed whether there are any other activities that, if not looked into, will have effect on the conduct of the firm? So these are key questions that every organization must pay attention to, and we must find answers to these questions within the framework of the enterprise risk management of the organization. The next slide. So what should we do as an organization or as organizations when it comes to conduct risk? We should have a properly implemented customer-centric strategy which produces sustainable profits. Customer-centric. So can we just substitute the words stakeholder-centric? Everything we do in the organization must be stakeholder-focused, right? And our conduct must be such that does not have any serious and negative impact on market stability. We should have a board-led culture which supports that strategy and good stakeholder outcomes. You see, we keep on talking about the board. You're talking about culture, talking about risk, talking about culture, that program has to be led by the board. It's very important, because if the board, the kind of tone that they are projecting to the organization suggests that we should not pay attention, when it comes to misbehavior, then of course everybody will be misbehaving in the organization. And that is why now board members are being held personally responsible for the need for them to provide, primary responsibility for oversight. Conduct is about the board, because if the board says they are not interested on issues relating on the right culture for the organization, then it percolates throughout the organization. Then develop products that operate in the interest of stakeholders and use behavioral techniques. Take a prospective view, prospective and proactive view on the products that we sell, using stress testing and other techniques. So it's very important to drive home this point that in trying to for the organization, we need to make sure that we factor in the issue of conduct risk into our risk management architecture. and that the board must be able to provide the kind of incentives and the kind of support that is required to be able to manage, conduct risk. Now, let's go to the next slide. Well, talking about perspective on Nigeria and Africa, I think a couple of studies have been done in that area. So I'll just try to summarize what the research is showing. Talking about conduct in Nigeria, especially in the financial services industry, you find that because of the aggressive pursuit for profit, a lot of issues, around conduct, comes up from time to time. And that same behavior is what we find in South Africa. We also find it across Africa. And that's because you can't really trust the kind of things. You can't really, put your hands on anything that, is happening across, different countries. We may have, or we do have, consumer protection, policies and agencies across, but it stops at that point of having policies and having frameworks to deal with the issue of conduct. But you find that it's so difficult to find very, very sound behavior when it comes, to respecting and relating to customers. So the point is, this is now a regulatory issue, and I want to strongly recommend that the regulators need to strengthen their regulatory mechanisms and begin to deal with the issues of conduct. Because if we don't get that right, every other regulatory actions will not be able to handle the kind of challenges that we face in a VUCA world. So I would say that conduct risk generally, the way it's being handled in Africa, is still at a very, very low ebb. Find many companies not really, acting in line with market standards and market standards or market behavior. But I think there's a lot of room for improvement in this area, and this must be a regulatory issue. I strongly recommend that the regulators should be able to, elevate this to the point of having, if possible, maybe a regulatory body that will focus essentially on, conduct risk. That is the only way we can get it right in Africa. So I want to thank you very much once again for your kind attention. Thank you.